Basic Statistics, Algebra 2, Trigonometry Regions. This is the first video in our statistics chapter, and we're going to learn a lot of basic definitions here. Some of which you know, such as mean, median, and mode. You've learned about those for years. Even range. But there's going to be some new things here also. There is an interquartile range, and most notably, something called standard deviation. And for all these, I give a brief description of what they are, but the example is going to kind of show you the best. But let me run through the definitions for you really quickly. Mean, also referred to as average, and we have a symbol for mean that looks like X with a bar over it. And it's the sum of the pieces of data divided by the amount of them. The median is the middle term, but it must be in order for that to happen. So we see these numbers here are not listed in order. So that would be difficult to find the median as it is. We'd have to rearrange it least to greatest, but we'll talk about that. Mode is the most often occurring number, and there can be more than one mode. The range is the difference from the maximum number minus the minimum number. So if you know the max and the min, you subtract them, you get the range. Interquartile range comes from the box and whisker plot that you learned back in Algebra 1, where if you have Q1 and Q3, you can subtract them to get the interquartile range. And then standard deviation. Standard deviation is new for you guys and probably the most important piece of this chapter. Standard deviation measures something called dispersion. And dispersion is basically how spread out the data is going to be. So to explain this further, let's look at an example. 10 teams competed in a cheerleading competition at a local high school. Their scores were so on. What is the mean, median, mode, range, interquartile range, and a question about standard deviation. The calculator does the majority of the work for us. So this is a heavy calculator chapter. All right, the way we do this, in our calculator we have a stat button. If we click on stat, it brings us to the first file called edit. And most of what we do here is just click on the first one. So if we hit just enter after we hit stat, it'll bring us to a table that should be empty. And the column should be titled L1, L2, L3. If you happen to have a number in there, all you have to do is go up to the title by clicking the up button, highlight the title, and hit clear, enter. That will erase the entire column in there. So what we want to do is just list these numbers in our L1 column. So one at a time, hit enter after each one of them. So 29, 28, 39, 37, 45, 40, 41, 38, 37, and 48. Take your time with that because the most common mistake is people either miss one or they type it in wrong by accident, like they put 440 instead of 40. So just be careful with that, and usually when people are getting odd-looking numbers, it's just because they have the wrong amount in there. And then one thing is, towards the bottom, if I highlight the last number, it's L1 and then parentheses 10. That's telling me that's a 10th number. So you could also kind of count these and make sure you have 10 numbers, and there are 10 teams in this competition, so make sure you have the right amount. But that's a common mistake you want to avoid. All right, now stat enter is how we, got to this table that we filled in. But if we hit the stat button again and hit the right arrow, this is where a lot of our statistics functions are going to be. A lot of these are called the regression models, which we'll learn in a couple of days. Today we're going to focus just on the top stuff. So 1 var stats stands for one variable statistics. That's what we want to choose. You select that. Depending on your calculator model, you may have the screen or you may not. If you do have this screen, then you just need to make sure it says L1 there. Frequency we want to leave blank for now, unless we're doing a frequency table. And we're going to click calculate. If you don't have this screen, that's okay. You can just hit enter and you should end up with these same numbers. This is a lot of good information in here. First, the top thing with the X with the bar over it, if I drag this screen over right here, that's your average. So you don't actually need to spend a lot of time doing average manually. Calculator will do it for you. So the average, the mean, is 38.2. All right, what else is in here? This number here is pretty much worthless for us, so is this. These two numbers are not. These are your standard deviations, and there's actually two types of standard deviation. The SX is called sample standard deviation. And the symbol here, which looks like a circle with a little tail on top, that's called the symbol sigma. It's a Greek letter. That stands for population standard deviation. So there's two types of standard deviation. Basically, sample is if you have a group, like in St. John's, if we were to say, take the people in the D period lunch and do a survey with them, that would be a sample of St. John's, not everybody. Population is everybody. And the question will always specify what type of standard deviation they want. Like if we look down here, it says population standard deviation. So that'll be our sigma x number. And we'll usually be rounding these values. N equals 10 just tells us how many numbers we have there. All right, but we can scroll down further on our calculator and get a lot of other good information there as well. So let me move this, make it a little bit smaller so I could fit them both in here. So n equals 10, we talked about that. Minimum equals 28. That's going to be useful for when we do our range. Maximum equals 48. That's what we need to do range. To do range, you do max minus min. So if you take your maximum value, 48, minus your minimum value, 28, that will get you a range of 20. That's your range. MED stands for median. So the median is 38.5. Interquartile range is Q3 minus Q1. So that's your quartiles here. We have Q1 is 37 and Q3 is 41. When we get to a box and whisker plot in class, you'll understand these numbers a little bit better. What they do, essentially, they split the data up into four quartiles, they're called, and so 25% of the data is in each section. But the interquartile range is just Q3 minus Q1, so that would be 41 minus 37, and that equals 4. So your range is 20, but your interquartile range is 4. All right, what is the mode? The mode is going to come from another, well, that's the most often occurring number, and you can kind of just look at the data for that. That won't be on this screen here. You see I got 29 once. Actually, I don't know if any of these numbers repeat. Oh, 37 looks like I got two 37s. So on, so on, so on. Take your time with that. We don't really do too much with mode at this level. It's really more of an algebra 1 thing. So I think the mode here is 37 because it appears twice. I think every other number here is only appearing once. All right. Then lastly, how many scores are within one population standard deviation of the mean? All right. So the mean is 38.2. And the population standard deviation, the sigma x, we're going to round it to just be 5.8, so let's just say 6 to make the questions easy for us. So if your average is 38.2 and your standard deviation is 6, what that means is, again, standard deviation is how spread out the data. Essentially, it's the average distance everything is from the average. So if the numbers are all bunched together really closely, you're going to have a really small standard deviation. If they're really spread out, you're going to have a large standard deviation. And so how many scores are within one standard deviation? So if your average is 38, 6 above that would be 44, and 6 below that would be 32. So we want to know how many scores are between 32 and 44, because 32 is a standard deviation below the mean. It's 6 below the average of 32. And 44 is a standard deviation above the mean. So that's your 38 plus 6. So how many of these scores are within this right here? So we're just going to count them. 29 is not, 28 is not, 39 is, that's 1, 37 is, 45 is not, 40 is, 41 is, 38 is, 37 is, and 48 is not. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is the answer there. So it's a lot of putting stuff in the calculator and then playing with the numbers, but this concept of standard deviation, we're going to spend a lot of time on, so we're going to talk a lot more about that in class when I see you the next day.